No, they're pairs for you. I'm just starting my seminar again. Hi again. Okay, so the question we were answering, what did Stalin think America was really trying to do by rebuild Germany? And that was infiltrate Russia through Germany. Okay, so over the page, we have this really kind of subtle switch from friends to enemies. Just want to make sure everyone's back who is coming back. Okay, so we have this switch from friends to enemies, but we need to remember we were never tight. This was never BFF with Stalin. So there are reports that historians have studied Stalin's totalitarian rule, and they've noted that he killed between 6 and 10 million of his own people through gulags and starvation. So anyone opposed to communism was an enemy of the state and killed in the same way through concentration camps, gulags, or just firing line, hanging, anything else, burning their house with them in it. These are all just a regular part that we will see dictators using in order to gain and maintain control ideology of the ideology as well as of people's actual movements. So there were reports throughout the 1920s and 30s of Stalin's less than shining record of human rights. So when we became allies partway through World War II with Stalin, we as the West is what I mean, we knew some of what we were getting into. And this was a political alliance because the greater evil seemed to be Hitler and Nazism. Okay, so this was a political alliance for a period of time because it suited us. It's like allying with a bully to beat the bigger, worse bully. But then you're always watching your back because you know you've made an alliance with a bully. So when we talk about, oh, we're in a Cold War now, it was almost inevitable because this was never really going to work. Because especially as the US is gaining power and becoming what we'll call a superpower by the end of World War II, and they are 100% capitalist. And we see the USSR superpower, the end of World War II, 100% communist. Those, as you know, from Animal Farm and from just being alive, are opposite ends of the spectrum. And so it becomes really hard to navigate even how you would do trade and economics when you're dealing with total government control, and the least government control, the better. It just gets really tricky. Never mind when you start getting human rights perspectives into there, child labor, all the other sorts of things, property ownership, those sorts of things. So we need to understand that it's not totally surprising at the end of World War II that, oh, we have nothing in common and I kind of despise the way you do things, that we get this coldness happening. We could even see during World War II, for example, there was some tension in our relationship, in the West relationship with the USSR, even before Normandy. Remember, the USSR is begging their allies to open up a second front because they're getting all the heat of Germany on the Eastern Front. So they're asking the West. And so there's some just animosity because they think, boy, you sure took your time opening up the second front. And we had all these casualties and we suffered all this devastation while you seem to take your time opening up this Western front while we were feeling the heat on the Eastern front. Then there's also tension at the end of the war because the troops that are stationed in Germany or that had been prisoners of war in German concentration camps are now like liberated, but the USSR liberated some of those areas, and those soldiers were actually just put into gulags in the USSR because of these rising tensions. So there's a lot of hostility and a lot of accusations like our soldiers weren't freed as quickly as they should have been. They went from a concentration camp to your concentration camp. They weren't fed well. They weren't, you did not make every effort to get them to terminals where they could get home quickly. There's all these, so there was already some tension. That's what I'm trying to say. So the Cold War is really just a cooling of a tense friendship anyway. It was never going to be BFFs. Okay. So we were allied for a period of time and for political reasons, not because we aligned ideology with our ideologies. And so at the end of the sort of forced alliance, then we're definitely going to have different ideas on what the USSR is doing. So the USSR really for those Eastern European countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia, they go from being controlled by Germany to being controlled by the USSR. And they don't want to be controlled by either. They want to be their own country. So increasingly in the West, we are seeing the USSR and the Soviets are saying, we're just repatriating them. They really belong with us. They want to be part of the mother country. This is the same thing, the same spiel that Germany used in the late 30s to take over Czechoslovakia and to take over Austria and to take over eventually Poland. Same rationale. They really want to be part of the motherland. They belong. They just, got separated and now they're like orphans coming home. So this is actually not what's happening. And most of the people in those countries like Czechoslovakia and Poland do not want to be part of communist Russia. They're promised things that make it seem like a good idea at the time. But many of them are very suspicious of what this will mean because remember, they've just been taken over by Germany. They've just been freed. And now Russia is moving in saying, remember, you're really Russian. So this is causing some tension as well. Things are heating up there. So when we get to, let's see. Okay, so we get a blockade begins. We're back on our sheet here, and I'll try to stay more closely onto our sheet. So we've moved from friends to enemies. And we see the answer to the question there is the Americans decided to bolster to help Germany, the west side of Germany, without the help or permission of the USSR. That's going to cause a problem because these two are superpowers. So the blockade begins June 12th, 1948. So kind of 3 years after the end of victory in Europe, the USSR declares that a highway coming into Berlin, so this blockade has to do with Berlin, which remember is in the center of Soviet-controlled Germany. So they're like, hey, sorry, we need to close this highway for repairs. And then we see a stoppage of all the road traffic between the west and eastern parts of Germany. So the Soviets cut off train traffic then between the two zones, all within Berlin. So they're cutting off road traffic, train traffic, and then Russians said they're no longer going to send food from the eastern side into the American, British, and French zones of Berlin. So by cutting off, this is answering the question here, by cutting off all transportation and food to the Western Allies zone in Berlin, what's Stalin trying to do? What do you think Stalin is trying to do?
Trying to starve out all the powers over there and making sure that no one can actually attack with force.
Okay, yep. What else could he be trying to do? Remember, think of bullies. Think of two, sorry guys, not to put you down, but it just seems easier to picture between two macho guys posturing over who's going to be alpha male. What else could he be trying to do by pulling this stunt? What do you think? Do you think he wants World War III?
He wants to take over all of Britain and Europe, I guess. So then in this scenario, since everyone else is already kind of weak, a World War III might actually be beneficial because he hasn't really done any heavy fighting except for when Germany tried to invade him. But then he had the crazy advantage because none of the German people were equipped to fight on the Russian front.
Right.
So they just wiped them out with minimal casualties.
Right. But I think the USSR is feeling it for sure at the end of World War II. Remember, they're fighting their own internal enemies because anyone who's not a communist is an enemy of the state. So they are on a patrol for enemies in a way that the other countries aren't, in some way fighting within themselves. I'm going to suggest that he's maybe just testing the waters to see how badly do you remember Berlin is in the middle of Soviet control. Maybe he just wants Berlin. He just wants the whole thing. How badly are you going to fight? Because if I look again at our map, if he cuts the roads off to supply West Berlin, how are they going to get anything to West Berliners? I think he might just be posturing to see how badly do you want this? And maybe he's hoping they roll over and just go, we don't want it in World War III. Fine, you have it. We'll just put all of our resources along the border of these Soviet controlled places. Okay, so maybe he's hoping they pull out of Berlin, let him have all of Berlin, and just back off so that they then fortify. Think of the game of Risk if you're familiar. So then you fortify the areas you still control along this border. That's what I think, that's more what he's just kind of saying. It's kind of like, I don't know, throwing an insult at someone and seeing, are we going to duel this out? Like, are we going toe to toe here? Or are you going to back off? Who's going to back down? And what he sees is the West does not back down. So the blockade begins. He's, pulled his punches. And so I would suggest he's just trying to test the waters, see how badly the West wants all of the Western Berlin, or if they would cave and he could have Berlin. So Stalin cut off the food to the Western zone, and he cut off the transportation to get food to them. And people in West Berlin had 35 days worth of food left and 45 days worth of coal to heat their homes. So the Western Allies were greatly outnumbered by the Russians. One video I watched, it was like one Allied troop to 62 Soviet troops. So like hugely outnumbered in terms of, their fortifications along here. So if a conflict had started, the Americans, British, and French would certainly have lost their Berlin zones. So if Stalin had started a conflict all along that front, it's really likely they would have lost all of Germany. But he didn't. He really was just posturing over Berlin itself. Okay, so then we're going to get into an airlift. So because trains are blocked, roads are blocked, The only thing that the Allies can think to do, they have kind of a couple of options. So do we cave to this bully? Do we say, yeah, we just came out of World War II. We're just trying to rebuild. This is Europe, especially when you're thinking about the United States and Canada. You're like, this is Berlin in Europe. Can we not just let them have Berlin? Like, fine. You just cave and say, okay, you can have Berlin, but we're keeping and we're fortifying the line around Germany. So that was one option. Another option was to come in with tanks on those closed roads and make World War III. A final option that kind of they came up with was airlifting. And by using non-military aircraft, so just convoys, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on what those specific planes are called, but they were not warplanes, they were just for relief, airlifting supply. So by using unarmed aircraft, they were really forcing Stalin's hand to say, do you want a World War III? Because the first time you shoot down an unarmed, just carrying food kind of aircraft, you're going to start World War III. So their first airlifts were really testing, how badly do you want this, Stalin? Like, do you want to go toe to toe? What are you going to do? Are you going to shoot down an unarmed Allied aircraft? Or are you going to let us supply West Berlin? So this goes on, ladies and gents, for 15 months. That kind of 11 to 15 month range of them airlifting supplies. And finally, the USSR backs down and like opens those roads that they initially said, we got to do some construction here, open up the roads, and just kind of like, you give. So we're going to skip down to the end of the blockade, and I'm going to let you answer those questions on your own, and you can probably do that while I'm talking. Maybe you already have. So after 15 months of bringing, not brining, bringing supplies in by airplane, so some 2,326,406 tons of food and supplies were delivered on, catch this, 278,228 flights to Berlin over this 11 to 15 month period. 278,228 flights to Berlin. Altogether, the Western Allies flew over 92 million miles, which is almost the same distance from the Earth to the sun. And we see that there were a total of 101 deaths over the operation, mostly due to just airplane crashes, not like Soviets shooting anyone down. So there's this posturing, though, there's this tension that at any moment, should the Soviets decide, nope, we want Berlin and we don't want you to keep airlifting supplies, they could shoot down those flights that were going. So there was Cold War tensions over what are they going to do? How are they going to handle this? Okay, so we've covered that airlift. Just to help us see a little bit of the difference between this time period and our own, I can remember my history teacher in high school saying that throughout the 70s and 80s even, kids in schools had to practice what they would do if an air raid siren went off, okay? So what would they do during nuclear attacks? What would they do? So they had to practice, oh, you hear that siren, that means we might be getting bombed, and go under your desk. But different than, and like masks and things like that. So what would you do during nuclear attack? They had to practice these drills like we, if we were in a public system, would probably have to practice, what are we going to do if there's a school shooter? Okay, they didn't practice, what are we going to do if there's a school shooter? They had, what are we going to do if the USSR's missiles like that are pointed at us all the time actually launch. So we see Canada kind of as this middle power between the USSR and the United States. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow in your individual independent time and in our seminar on Wednesday. Okay, so Wednesday is our last history seminar where we're covering new information. Next Monday will be all about review, and I'll be giving you some examples. Specifically, we'll be talking through how would we answer essay questions. If this was the essay question, what would a good thesis be? We'll talk through that stuff next Monday. So Wednesday and Thursday, so Thursday will be the last new material that you have for this course. We're just flying through the Cold War because we've had so much fun studying the other things. Any questions? I want to make sure I wrap up on time. I could go on forever, but I want you guys to have a wonderful break. Travel, go to a bistro, put your feet up, have a nap. I'll see you at 1:15 in English, but I want you to have a great break, okay? Do it all. Have so much fun. And I'll see you at 1:15. Bye.